really excited to have Jason and his team here from Vancord. Cybersecurity is definitely an item and a topic that we've been hearing for weeks, and we're still hearing more and more. So without further ado, I'll have Jason kind of introduce himself and a little bit about your business, and then you can take it away.
Sure, thanks. Actually, let me share my screen then, so we actually have these up here. And because this is a PowerPoint on the other screen, can you actually see the first slide there? Okay.
Yep.
Great. So I should be able to go through. So Kham, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself? Does everybody know who you are?
Yeah. Some people know, but I'll quickly go through this. So, we've been doing this webinar series, I think, since the beginning of March or the end of February. And, we're really focused on helping businesses across the board when it comes to marketing, sales, and customer success. So I've been doing it for 15 years now. And, we have, my team I have teams, members are remotely and locally, remotely that are local and national. So, the topic today I think is really relevant and exciting also for myself to learn more from Jason and his team. But everything comes down to ROI and KPIs, key performance indicators, to drive, strategies. Companies right now are trying to figure out how can I see, results with my team working remotely. So a lot of the series talks about that. If there's any insights that you can talk about performance or metrics as well, Jason, that'll be wonderful as well to share with people that you're seeing in the marketplace.
Sure. So I'm Jason Pufall. I've been in the security space for a long time. I think 20 years actually probably isn't accurate anymore even. I should probably look at that. I was the Chief Information Security Officer at UConn before leaving and starting Vancord with folks from TPG. So you'll see Michael Green on the call. He and I are partners in that and coordinate on sort of security and the infrastructure work that TPG Inc. does. Kind of a long background in sort of IT and security in general. Frequent presenter, did a fair amount of work, so some collaborative things. Chairs with a higher ed information security roundtable for the state of Connecticut that we actually ran out of UConn for a long time. So a frequent presenter, a big fan of collaboration. These types of events are perfect. So thanks to Kham for organizing. So it's actually not a huge group here. So I want to make this as conversational as we can. So honestly, anybody who wants to come off mute, ask a question or participate in any way, feel free. And really, we can almost take this in any direction that somewhat people have interest in. So I've got a variety of my team in here. Steve Maresca and Mike Lang and Russ Janster actually all work with me. So if I can't answer it, I guarantee one of them can, and we'll go from there.
Jason, before you get too much further, you are breaking up a little bit. I think everyone's hearing it. I don't know if your internet's unstable or if we could do anything, but it is breaking in and out.
Need to change the battery of your Bluetooth device, or I don't know if you're using Bluetooth.
Yeah, let me try to make a change here. Zoom is not complaining on my side like it normally would, but
now you sound a lot better. So it could have just fixed itself.
Really, it could have. Let me all right, so Laura, just let me know then if I sound lousy again, right? And I'll just pause or we'll go from there. So we actually have a few things that we'll really touch on, really in this, sort of, we'll call it transition from the workplace to home that so many organizations have done now. We're going to focus a little bit on sort of staying vigilant and some of our rationale for why we think it's a little bit more important now even than traditionally. We'll talk a little bit about our idea of security fundamentals and why really our opinion is that some really basic and straightforward sort of procedural things that you can do on a daily basis will make a huge positive impact on your security posture. A little bit about security awareness training and some of the benefits.
You guys having the feedback for audio? How's the audio sound for you guys? Sorry to interrupt, Jason. I just wanted to kind of...
It's bouncing for me a lot.
Hey, Jason, turn off your camera. I think that may help if it's coming from a bandwidth perspective.
Or try to...
I can do both of those things.
I know one time for me, I literally had to just plug in my headphones and it worked. I don't know why, but
Right. So can you hear me now?
yes.
And is that any different?
It's clear now. It's smooth, and it sounds a little different. So whatever audio change you did might have fixed it.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I swapped to a different mic, so it's not the best beginning, right? But all right. Well, let me know. Just keep letting me know. I'll turn off my video if need be. So we'll talk a little bit about security awareness training. Some basic tips for that transition to home, and the fact that you're sharing your environment now with friends. Well, probably not friends, right? Family. Maybe kids and potential partners who are also working, right? So things you can do there, and then a little bit on some of the more corporate type technology we see out there regularly, and then some incident response discussions. So what we do at Vancord is work with customers on a consulting basis, right? So we don't sell a lot of hardware, for example. We're engaged very often for sort of advisory capacity, right? People are considering making proactive improvements to their security environment, or perhaps on sort of the implementation or recovery side. So, unfortunately, we're pulled in a lot with folks who have had some sort of cyber attack or some sort of incident. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with ransomware attacks and the threats that they pose. So we'll cover that a little bit, because it's an ongoing risk, and it's a risk that certainly doesn't disappear now that you're working from home instead of in the business. We will talk a little bit about the adjustments and improvements to your security posture just as an individual, things that you can do and how those translate really into sort of corporate benefits as well. Kind of walk through compliance, and then the VPNs, and then finally talking a little bit about sort of incident readiness or incident preparedness, and have you given thought to what will you do in the event that actually something were to happen. One thing that's interesting in this shift, and we've seen a lot of people, of course, either furloughed, right, working less, or in some cases, being put on some sort of temporary hiatus or altogether. Attackers and hackers, they're really in a lot of cases, they're people who hold full-time jobs, and in some cases moonlight. They're looking for supplemental income like anybody else. They have more time on their hands. And honestly, as a result, we actually see more hacker-related activity. And so it's kind of interesting, right? At the same time that your workforce has been relocated and might actually have some challenges in terms of the traditional, on-site visibility they have to infrastructure or on-site access to staff. So it's a little more difficult sometimes for them to engage. The attackers actually have more time. Can be more creative, and actually can really spend some dedicated time looking for maybe creative ways to attack or subvert some of the defenses you have in place. We're seeing evidence out there already, as you would expect, for phishing attacks that are referencing COVID-19, potential payroll schemes, and opportunities for companies to take advantage of salary that might or might not be real, but they're trying to encourage you to click on links and provide credentials or download malicious software. These things work. I would say probably the number one issue that we see is companies' employees falling for phishing attacks, and the attackers leverage them because they work, and they consistently work, and they effectively subvert mostly all of the quality security controls that you might put in place at an organization. So it's really something to pay attention to, and it's really an area that speaking to your employees is a valuable thing to do to understand sort of the risk there. And the other thing I think at a high level is we'll call out Zoom a little bit, but the reality is it's video conferencing in general. We've all certainly turned to it. Zoom is kind of the de facto standard, right? There's other folks out there that still exist, but from a stability and a quality standpoint, except for maybe the first 5 minutes of this webinar, Zoom has always been great, right? But it's getting a lot of bad press, and it's from some of the design considerations that they've made, or design choices that they've made, sort of security choices and encryption choices. But the question is it safe? And you're seeing it all the time. our opinion here really is it's a great platform. The video is great, the audio typically is great, does a nice job, bringing people in, sort of like this in a format where you can see, a lot of people at once. Some platforms have limitations there. But it might not be the best platform if you're going to talk about some significantly confidential information. If you were a small doctor's office and you were trying to use it for any kind of remote sort of telemedicine, probably not the best platform for it. So I think from our standpoint, we're always careful to recommend balancing sort of need with risk. And the reality is, for most of us, our needs are fairly modest. We're just trying to conduct business on a daily basis, share some basic screens and do some work. Zoom's a great platform for it. If your needs start to get more complicated in terms of the type of data you're sharing, there probably are other platforms out there that would be better. And certainly we could recommend those. But for the average user, the average day, Zoom's great. Just curious, I'll pause periodically because I know I can get on a roll and not seeing everybody's visual cues, right? Any questions at all so far? Anything anybody wants to bring up? So, the security fundamentals. We talk about this a lot when we are working with our clients. The thing that I love about them is they're so applicable to us as individuals, right? And as valuable to us as individuals as they are to a corporation. So we joke sometimes that in security we're sort of in the bad news business, and we often get called when a mistake has been made or there's a problem. And 8 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, we find that an attacker has leveraged a really basic missing security control, like a current patch or a misconfigured system or a missing vulnerability. And we're always talking to our clients about, it's not that exciting, right? Security can be boring, but do those boring things. Patch your systems on a monthly basis. When Microsoft releases their patches, if you've got a third-party tool that you use all the time and it's got an update, apply that update. If you know that there are maybe specific vulnerabilities, that this applies typically more to the IT groups, address those vulnerabilities, because attackers and sort of cyber attacks, it's a big business. It's organized crime essentially, and just like all of us in our businesses, they're looking to maximize their return on investment for every activity that they do. So if they can attack a company that just has sort of sloppy operational practices and doesn't apply patches rigorously, they're a far more attractive target than one that does. And it's such an easy way to improve your security, in almost all cases for free, because mostly every vendor is going to give you security patches for nothing, and makes you less attractive to the unprotected company, or the poor operationally managed companies. You can do those at home. Go through your environment home, make sure that your work laptops are patched if your company doesn't do that for you. Make sure that any family members' laptops are patched. Look at all those devices that you have around the house, your Nest thermostats, your Apple TVs, right? Anything that might be running some sort of operating system that you can update, take a little time and actually update those. Those basic steps provide a lot of security value, and significantly improve sort of the reliability and usability of your infrastructure going forward. The other thing that I always like to talk about is backing up your data. And again, personally, there's a lot of value in just periodically, from a low-tech standpoint, periodically copying important data down to a flash drive or the removable hard drive, something like that, so that you have a secondary copy. Clearly at the corporate level, making sure that your users are saving their data in approved locations so that you can actually get all that data backed up. For many companies, they may actually not have some of those processes in place. So you've got users now that are remote. They're collecting files, through email and a variety of other mechanisms, and they may be sharing or saving them locally. Make sure that you work with your users to get their data centrally stored and backed up. It provides so much value from a recovery standpoint, from a data continuity standpoint, and again, helps protect you against some of the attacks that we see out sort of every day. And then finally, right, your whole workforce is remote. we're big advocates of sort of logging activity. And I don't mean day to day, keeping tabs on websites your users are going to. That's typically unimportant. It's more who's logging into your systems. Do you actually know who they are? Are they logging in from places that you would expect them to be logging in from? Generally knowing some of those type of behavioral analytics for your users. Commonly, we talked about phishing attempts a little bit earlier. It's really common for an attacker to get access to credentials from your company and log in from really random locations. One good thing I guess we could say about this pandemic is you generally should know where most of your users are. They're probably there all the time. It should be reasonably easy to sort of keep track of, hey, Laura's logging in from home on a regular basis, just like we'd expect, and then all of a sudden you see a login from across the country or across the world. Those don't make sense. So it's a real opportunity to identify, do you see malicious activity? Is there anything unexpected, and can you follow up on that? And it's a really valuable tool at your disposal, typically for free for many IT organizations. And I'll pause again and just see if anybody pops off. I think I see a couple things in my chat, if I can pull that up. So security awareness training is something that we really like to emphasize on our side. I'm not a huge fan of talking about purely security controls, technical controls. Clearly, we work in that space a fair amount, and clearly a lot of companies put things in like firewalls or data loss tools or some other things to help control users' behavior. But we're big advocates of training your workforce so that they understand what those threats are that exist, and can really serve as that first line of defense. Going back to that phishing example earlier, users who understand how to identify phishing threats and recognize sort of the basic ways that they can sort of identify malicious links or recognize unauthorized emails, it's a huge benefit. They're intended to entice your workforce to provide credentials. It's very difficult from an IT standpoint to put in technical controls that will protect against those types of activities. Train your workforce. Let them be your first line of defense. Let them be engaged with the challenges that you as IT people might face every day, and let them protect your business. Quite honestly, it could be a good time to do that. I think, in some cases, a lot of people have some extra time in their day. Business might be a little bit slower, or maybe customers are sort of focused on some other things and not calling in as much. It's possible your staff has more time than normal. Take advantage of that opportunity to sort of do an informational webinar like this, or some canned training. There's certainly products out there in the market that can do some canned training. But take advantage of that, I think, and leverage Zoom to really do that, right? People are used to sitting in front of their desk now for long period of times in front of the video. Schedule a half hour with them, talk to your employees, find out how they're doing, and do a little bit of security awareness training at the same time. So Tina, it looks like, has asked actually if we could offer an approved list of sort of protection software, backup software. And do we have a list of items that we might check on for sort of security concerns? So, I don't know about necessarily approved. I think and Tina, we're happy to talk about some specific technologies out there for sure. More often, what I really want to talk about is you make sure you are backing things up. And so it's really difficult. I'm hesitant typically to say, listen, you use this product because it's so much better than this other product. What we more often see is people buy a product, they don't implement it properly, or they don't leverage it properly, and therefore they aren't sort of aren't getting the value out of it that they want. But I will throw it over maybe quick to Mike, Steve, or Russ, and just see if they have any specific opinions on any tools that you use for sort of local protection or backup.
So just to jump in real quick, what I was kind of looking for, and Kham knows this about me, is sort of the go bag. The smaller companies, like it's hard to keep up with everything, and I work hard to prioritize every day. So I'm often hopeful that people will maybe give me like a hit list or a checklist that's prioritized by, here's where you are really standing there with your pants down. You might want to check this.
Right.
I do great backup. I always do backups and whatnot, but there's so many things that I think we're exposed to that I'm not thinking about. So that's kind of what I was looking at, is like the top risks, and you know.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm happy to pause for a second. It looks like Mike and Steve both jumped off of mute for a minute, so let's sort of get their opinions, and I can chime in as well.
I was just going to quickly say, I mean, rather than picking a specific vendor, I think the process that's being used to manage it sometimes can be more important. For example, you can have the best software in the world, but if that software is available over the network and you make the administrator password, somebody's going to guess that and they're going to ruin your backups. So, following some of those best practice, make sure that you've really restricted the backup service so that's using a strong password. Only administrators can gain access to it. It's doing an off-site or offline backup somewheres. I mean, those are the things that I look towards. And I think most of the enterprise backup solutions provide those types of features.
Yeah, I concur. We see those issues. We see specific issues where attackers will target backup platforms just to ensure that you don't have them available when you actually need them. In the case of extortion, like ransomware, there are many, many, many vendors and many platforms that are appropriate. So it's hard to provide a list without knowing more about your particular needs. Like the spectrum is broad. If we're talking about individual workstations and you don't really have a huge amount of centralized server infrastructure, you could go with something that only backs up on workstations. That's perfectly appropriate. Maybe that's how your business functions on a normal basis. If you don't have shared storage, that's probably the best fit. On the other end, if you have network shares and servers that house data, databases and so forth, you need software which, in a more comprehensive way, pulls in that data and either preserves it on local storage or offsite entirely. All of those are appropriate, perhaps in parallel within an organization. The best fit depends upon your specific business need.
And so Tina, I don't know much about the business you're in, clearly. Would you just mind? Are you a kind of a large business, a small business? A little bit of background for a second.
Yeah, extremely small, and mostly on the ball, I would say, about it. I just kind of look to these sort of networks and webinars as sort of, this is my opportunity to get somebody to give me a whisper about something I just have not even thought about. So, I have IT background. I'm not like clueless to it or anything, but I'm also small and I can't afford to put a ton of money into it either. So I'm trying to just be ultra aware, and yet I can't give 10% of my time to finding out what the latest phishing attack is. So I hope for conversations like this where that becomes like a quick, easy way for me to protect myself.
Right.
So I think one of the things that we do that is really different than a lot of companies is we're happy to talk to you honestly about the technologies that you have in place now, and can you use them better? So we see all the time, Microsoft does a great job of providing a lot of features and a lot of value that most companies just don't take good advantage of. And configuring your password policies better and sort of using some of the built-in tools that they have can provide a ton of value, potentially for free. And quite honestly, we're happy to have a conversation around that. I don't think our mission is security improvement, and if that means that you can do that for free, then good for you. If that means you need our help, then good for all of us. But if you want to have a follow-up conversation around the things that you're doing, happy to give you some guidance there. So there we go. So some basic home computer network tips, and I probably will lean a little bit on Mike, Russ, and Steve for this to add their 2 cents to it, because it's a quick slide. But it's an interesting transition that we have now, because you probably are in a house with people who you don't work directly with every day, that are engaging in behaviors maybe that are good or bad, right, for corporate infrastructure. I've got 2 kids. One of them is a teenager now. I have no idea what he's downloading and what clever things his friends are encouraging him to do online. Those things put my kind of corporate infrastructure at risk, right? So I have configured my home network such that his stuff is on a guest portion of the network. I sit on what I'll describe as a more protected part of the network. I try to do a little bit of basic isolation at home, just to better protect what I'll describe as the lifeblood of my day, which is my laptop and 1 or 2 other little sort of basic devices. They have to work for me to be productive. It can't break, and I can't allow something sort of foolish that occurs in the house to impact that. So some really basic segmentation can improve that. Any guest that were to come over, I would ask them to join a guest wireless network for the same reason. I don't know if they have antivirus, right? What the sort of state of their computer is, and I want to protect the infrastructure I have at home. The other thing that you might want to consider, and maybe I should have done this at the beginning, prioritize your work equipment so that that you've got bandwidth allocated for that. We're all probably running on cable networks, or some sort of lower bandwidth style network. You're in contention with maybe people watching Netflix while also doing Zoom and a whole variety of other things. A little bandwidth prioritization work will actually ensure that kind of the work activities continue to work from whatever your work hours are, and then allow your other stuff to sort of happen after that. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that or not.
Yeah, I'd like to comment that I think that a frequently overlooked and very simple thing to do at home is to install an ad blocker. Now, in the world of marketing, that sounds somewhat contentious, but if you want to protect your everyday browsing, malicious advertisements exist, and frankly, there's a bit of a quality of experience that may be out there that you can gain by installing at least a basic ad blocker in your browser, and there are many of them that pay specific attention to blocking malicious advertisements. There are specific lists you can enable, and you can keep receiving your Google advertisements or your Amazon recommendations and things like that. Many people find them useful. Certainly, they're beneficial from a marketing standpoint to tune products that land in front of you. But from the perspective of protecting yourself and protecting those in your home, and therefore protecting your work activity at home, taking a look at that sort of a product would be useful. And most of them are free. They're just extensions that you add to your browser.
Yep. Actually, we don't have it on the slide, but I feel every security discussion warrants a quick talk about password managers and making sure that you use a unique password for every site and every login that you have. Think about the sort of credential leaks that we've seen in the past. Yahoo, LinkedIn are 2 that come to mind. If you use the same credentials there and an attacker steals them, you have to really treat anywhere that you use that username or password combination as exposed at that point. It's pretty impossible to remember all the usernames and passwords you might have for all the unique sites. So use a password manager. Use something like a 1Password or a LastPass. Create reasonably long passwords. We'd say 12 characters or greater. We don't argue a lot, quite honestly, around special characters and all that kind of all that, right? But length kind of reigns supreme. The longer it gets, the harder it is to remember. Password managers really take away any of that challenge. Every conversation we have, we talk about the use of password managers. We just can't emphasize that enough. So maybe a little less individual and a little bit more corporate. If you're doing any kind of remote work and you've got VPNs in place for your company or you're using those, really, I guess fundamentally from these 4 bullets is make sure they're configured correctly. Make sure that if you can, you use two-factor with those, so that it's not just purely a username and password combination, but you've got sort of that second factor. A lot of companies like Duo will have an app for your phone, so you log in, you get a prompt on your phone, and you'll hit OK, and then you're allowed to get access in. If you have remote access capabilities, make sure you leverage a two-factor tool to protect those. But then also, make sure you do some basic filtering at a firewall, at the VPN concentration point itself, so that you aren't allowing all traffic into every single device that you're within your sort of corporate environment. Give a little thought to what does a remote user need, and make sure you've configured your remote access to permit only that. This is quite honestly, this is Mike's strength, is all things networking, remote access. So I want, before I go too far, Mike, is there anything you want to add at all to that?
I would just say, I think it's common that a lot of times when people connect VPN service, that they tend to do it very quickly, and they may give full access to the internal enterprise. Depending on how large of an enterprise you are, you should really consider restricting access per user back into your network. So what I mean by that is, if you have internal web servers that serve your entire company, well, you allow all your users that connect to that VPN to do that. But if you only have a handful of IT people, and they're the ones that manage your servers, and they're the ones who access your backup, RDP to your servers, and those sort of things, you should configure your VPN policies to only allow those authorized people make those connections. What that does is it prevents identity theft from your normal users, if it happens, from having full access into your network, which would just be catastrophic. And that's typically what we see, is just a normal user in a network. They fall prey to a phishing attack. The attacker has their credentials, and then the attacker knows where the VPN remote access is. They use those credentials. And then once they're connected to the network, if they have full access to the entire network, then it's kind of easy for them to just start picking on all the systems and gain full access to your infrastructure. If you've properly restricted that endpoint, it makes their job much more difficult. If you follow the recommendation that Jason just mentioned to put multi-factor authentication on your remote access, then you pretty much neutralize that threat, because no one's going to beat your two-factor. But we do realize that people installing two-factor is a bit of a process. It usually doesn't happen overnight. So if you don't have it currently, you should probably think about how you can layer that in sooner than later.
Okay.
I think I'd like to add as well that virtual desktop infrastructure or app virtualization, things like Citrix to deliver access to some internal tool, can be extremely helpful in the realm of security. We expect that we encounter legacy applications in most of our customer environments. Sometimes that means that they can't be upgraded. They are risks, and they are rightly things that you should worry about. However, if they're business critical, there's likely a way that they can remain in use while being protected. This type of tool helps to make that a possibility. If you have something that a manufacturer has abandoned, or was a special purpose tool that was built for your company, you may never see a patch again. But if you need it and it still works, as long as you can isolate it and ensure that individuals access it only through approved mechanisms like VDI, like remote desktop, like app virtualization, then you have the ability to protect that critical tool and accept that the risk is present while hidden away from an attacker.
And really, even more basically than that, especially in these remote, with this remote environment we're in, it's easy to secure a virtual desktop. You can make administrative changes to those. You can ensure that they're sort of virus free or configured properly. And every day a user basically gets a fresh copy of that workstation, or can get a fresh copy. So it can be a great way to deploy infrastructure to your staff remotely in a way that's really, really well managed and really secured. But we also recognize, it potentially comes at a cost, and not every organization has access to that, of course. So
one thing that it might explicitly support is, or rather reduce, is the worry relative to personal devices. many
Right.
people are home without corporate provided equipment. Those devices may not have been updated recently. They may not be possible to update. If there's a trust problem that you have with those personally owned devices being used to access corporate infrastructure, using tools like that allows you to essentially accept that the client workstation can be unprotected. It can be unsafe, but you know that what they're accessing remains integral and remains untouched.
Right. And it actually, it's interesting because a lot of companies that we've spoken with, they didn't really have a plan for how to, take their workforce that arrived in the office every single day, probably sat at a desktop, and then all of a sudden, right, we're told to go home. Lots of them are just using computer equipment that they had hanging around the house. You have absolutely no idea what the state of that equipment is. You have no idea if the people connecting now to your resources are coming from, a reasonably trusted device or something that, is just riddled with viruses and, sort of a time bomb waiting to happen. So, uh, if you have users that are using their personal equipment and you haven't given thought to, have you provided them an antivirus tool? Have you backed up any of their data? Right? Are you doing anything to sort of understand the security posture of the people that are connecting to your networks? It's definitely valuable giving that some thought. It represents real risk, and can be remediated or addressed even remotely. And then really finally, I think the last real topic we're talking about here is incident response. And we could spend an hour on this pretty easily. It's a lot of the work that we do, but I think what we really want to emphasize is you do want to take some precautions to prevent incidents if you can, but then really be prepared for them, sort of when they come. It's interesting to talk with some of the customers now that we engage in incident response work with, because there's less shame in it than there used to be, right? 10 years ago, if you had an incident, it was almost viewed like you made this tremendous mistake. Now the reality is, it's clear that hackers are an organized crime entity, that they've got a lot of time. They can focus very closely on a single organization, and if they want access, ultimately, it's really difficult to prevent it. So incidents occur, right? We see them in the news all the time. But I think it's really important that you plan for those. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is, do you have those components in place that when you have an incident, you can recover as quickly as you can, right? Effectively an assurance policy. Is your data protected? Do you have sort of log data that will help you identify whether they're sort of where the attack came from and whether it's contained? Gives you information about, do you have compliance requirements to notify? Being prepared for an incident, in my opinion, is as important as the steps you would take to avoid an incident. And very often, it's almost viewed as an insurance policy. People don't give it thought until they need it, and then sort of wish they had done that work. So we're always advocating for some of the basic preparation mechanisms around incident response. And quite honestly, I would say, I'll say 9 out of 10 of the people we work with oftentimes don't have some of the basic elements in place to make it so that they can recover quickly from an incident, and it's much more difficult than it needs to be. And if anybody wants to explore sort of incident preparedness, feel free to take a look at our website, vancord.com assessment. We're happy to have a conversation around sort of what that looks like. It's a straightforward discussion, and I think we provide a lot of value. I've got people moving out of my office here. So, and then finally, I think, this has been pretty informal. So we've gotten a couple of quick questions, but I did want to open it up for, anything relevant to the stuff that we've spoken about, or frankly, anything that's on your mind about security that you might just kind of want to explore. All right. I keep wondering if Megan's there and just blended into the bricks like at the beginning, or if she wandered off, but okay. Well, then with that, I want to say thank you for everybody taking 45 minutes out of their day and listening to me and everybody on my team sort of talk about this a little bit. We're always happy to chat more. If anybody actually has any questions coming out of this or wants to talk about anything in particular, we're happy to do that. So feel free to reach out to us.
This is
Kham,
great,
thank you.
Because this stuff is like relevant, and we're going to get more people asking questions, and there are definitely people that wanted to make it today and could not make it. So we do record all this. We can share it with people. We'll get this to you guys. And as you guys come across different things, love to have you back again, Jason. I think I saw something new recently, like Google's coming out with something where it is less like sign on. You know, they push out a new product because of the need to remove VPNs. So there's always new stuff coming out. I'm sure you guys get, you know, there's always new stuff. So just wouldn't know, you know, is that
Right.
headline or is that even relevant? Should I even consider it? Because we're G Suite users, so we love anything that comes from a Google product. You know, there's a lot of businesses, corporate companies that are G Suites.
And it could be, you know, to Tina's point earlier, you know, if we could do a discussion around your sort of common technologies in different spaces, right? Like, and you know, some of the AV technologies out there, or firewall technologies. So if it turns out that there's interest in maybe a little bit more specific discussion around security tools, you know, we could easily have that, right? We were trying to keep this sort of a little bit more open-ended just to get people thinking about things they should be doing.
Yeah, we do send out a survey, so we get people's feedback, and as those come in, that actually might be a really great topic as a follow-up.
Okay. Well, Laura knows I'm always happy to talk, right? So she, so I want to say thanks to everybody for spending time, and I hope you got something valuable out of this. Truly, I hope it was a worthwhile use of your time.
That's great. All right, guys, have a great Friday and the rest of the weekend. Till next time.
You too.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.